I'm George, and we're here in a Vanderveen restaurant in Amsterdam. Today we're going to make a dish based on tomatoes. So now, of course, tomatoes, they are in the season, they are of the peak in the season. We're gonna do different preparations and textures of tomatoes. This dish can stand alone, of course, is a part of our tasting menu. We're only focusing here on the tasting menus, on 10 or 12 or so courses. We're using produce mainly from Netherlands, and I would say it's like internationally inspired kitchen. We love to preserve, pickle, ferment, smoke and salt ingredients, and we like to mix up the season, the fresh produce of the season, with a lot of preserved stuff from last seasons or even 2 or 3 seasons ago. We are going to do first thing a tomato broth, so a Tomatenconsommé. I have here 1.5 kilo of tomatoes, 300 grams of onions, 500 grams of celery, about 75 to 80 grams of basil leaves, and 3 cloves of garlic. Alright, so to prepare the tomato broth or a consommé, you just have to have a blender. Doesn't really matter what blender is, and then roughly chop the ingredients, all the ingredients, they can go together. Blend them for a short period of time, I would say 20 to 30 seconds. Then you will see I will pass them through towel. I'm using a cheesecloth for that. And then with a little weight on the top, we'll take a clear tomato water. It needs a couple of hours to give you the full yield of the pulp that you will start with. We're going to pair these tomatoes with one of my favorite ingredients that they now in the season, and this is roses. What we do in this case, we pickle the roses. Usually they're ready right away. You can use them directly, but the best thing to do is leave them in the pickle juice for a couple of months. The roses that I'm going to use, I have fresh roses that are now in the season, and I will show you how to pickle them. But the roses that I'm going to use and I'm using in the restaurant, they've been preserved last year. Also, we're going to use garlic capers, which they almost in the season. They will come up at the end of August, I think, or beginning of September. Those ones we salt them first and then pickle them. It also takes a couple of months to have this done. And then you can see I pass everything through a cheesecloth. And a good tip is to add a little weight on the top, so a couple of small plates or a little pan. It will help to extract the tomato water. Next up, it's cherry tomatoes. So what we're going to do, we simply go in with the help of a blowtorch and burn the outside skin. You don't have to burn them too much, you only have to crack open the skin. You can also blanch and peel them, but then this is maybe adds a little bit of water into them. Also, burning them with a blowtorch gives a little bit of a smoke essence to the tomatoes, which is nice. So after we burn the tomatoes, we have to peel them off. So we need to make sure that all around they burn so that makes it easy to peel them. This works with all kind of tomatoes. What we're going to do after we peel those tomatoes, we're going to cure them. So what we're looking for is to cure them and then semi-dry them, so we intensify their flavors. What I like about cherry tomatoes and curing the tomatoes is that you intensify their flavor, because during the curing and the drying process they lose a lot of excess water, so then the sweetness and the natural acidity of the tomatoes is of course coming up. So for the curing I'm using 60% of sugar and 40% of salt, and I will cure them for 15 minutes. So simply drop them into the dry mix and then mix it together, and then after 15 minutes they sit in there. You'll see there is a lot of excess water in the cure mix, and then you have to go and wash them and then dry them on the top of the towel or pat dry them with a paper. We also use a little bit of smoked bacon to season the tomatoes, and also we'll make bacon oil. We'll season the broth. So we slice the bacon quite thin, but not too thin. I would say about 1 centimeter, and then we'll dice that into cubes. We don't use the outside skin because that will turn chewy. We're only using the meat. Of course, you need to use as best quality as you can bacon. I prefer the really smoked one. And then we slice the bacon like into a very small dice, and then we're going with the help of the oil, vegetable oil, to cook the bacon for a long time over low heat. So the goal is not to make the bacon crispy, it's to make the bacon soft and at the same time infuse the oil with the bacon flavor. So you see I use quite a lot of oil for a small amount of bacon, but I'm going to use this oil. The oil will be aromatized from the bacon, so the oil is more important in this case than the bacon pieces. Of course I'm going to use the bacon pieces, but the oil is more important to season the tomato broth. Next up, what we're going to do is we'll pickle the rose petals. Here I have just roses. Of course they food grade roses, so they're not having any pesticides or something. So I'm simply pouring over a cold pickle liquid. So the pickle liquid that I'm using here is 1 part apple cider vinegar, 1 part water, and 1 part sugar. So the tip is you bring to the boil the water and the sugar, and then you adding on the top the apple cider vinegar. Mix them up well, and then simply just pour over in a jar or in a container the roses. Another tip is that always the roses, they have to be submerged under the pickle liquid. Usually I put a little cling film and then a little weight on the top, so that forces the roses to be submerged. Otherwise on the top surface they may gonna get moldy. So I close that. I mean, you can use them directly, but I think the best to do is to leave them for at least 2 months. The full potential of those roses I think will be in around 6 months. And then next up we have here some wild garlic capers. The season for those is probably end of August. We preserve them with salt, so you treat them like capers. So you preserve them with a coarse salt and you keep them for, I would say, 2 months up to 2 years or something. And then after they done with the salting process, you rinse the salt off, and then you pour over a hot pickle liquid. It's very everyday simple ingredient that in this case is something that you probably never experienced before. So we're going to plate up this tomato dish. So we have the tomatoes, the cherry tomatoes that we first burn the outside skin and then peel, slightly cure, and then I dehydrate them for 2 hours at 60 degrees just to get rid of all of this excess water and intensify their flavor. So what I'm going to serve them with is bacon oil, bee pollen, some bacon pieces, garlic capers, and also some rose petals, a little bit of picked thyme, some flowers just for the visual aspect, and of course the tomato consommé. So this dish stands great alone, but it will be perfect garnish for meat or fish as well. I used to have it as a garnish as well for a beef dish, and it did as good as a dish alone. So this is a little bit of bacon oil. I'm using it here just to make the bee pollen to stick on the top of the tomatoes. I sprinkle a little bit of bee pollen on the top. It's also one of my favorite products. A few bacon pieces here and there, not too many, because we cure the tomatoes, so they're quite balanced in salt, so you don't need to add anything too salty. Some garlic capers, so they have a nice garlic flavor without being overpowering, when usually happens with garlic. Some picked thyme, and few pickled rose petals. This is a corn flour, but doesn't really matter. You can use whatever flour you like. And here we have the tomato consommé. So I left it to pass through the cheesecloth overnight, and you can see now it's transparent and clear. I season a little bit the tomato water with a leftover pickle liquid from the roses. That helps a little bit the acidity and also brings up the rose flavor. And I do exactly the same with, I use the oil that is left behind from the bacon pieces. Then mix it up well, and then you see the broth, it will split with the oil and it will give a nice contrast.
Lust je nog een video? Dat treft, want er staan er meer dan 1300 voor je klaar. Abonneer je op het YouTube kanaal of schrijf je in voor de nieuwsbrief, dan hou ik je wekelijks op de hoogte van nieuw materiaal.